I'm at the point in my life when I have to make notes, so read some of my notes here. This is all about making clock case parts and repairs, replicating wood movement parts, some of it employing a wood lathe. And we often see articles and programs related to working with lathes, mostly jewelers' lathes. And I can't really recall any program or bulletin articles related to working with wood lathes and wood tools to make parts or replacement parts for cases. So this is what the program's about. That's Chris Brown working on one of our chapter clocks in my shop in the backyard. According to my notes, if one's going to be involved in the restoration or repair of wood clock cases and wood movement parts, it's going to require access to a wood lathe, probably a router, a scroll saw, table saw, or a radial arm saw. And then you're going to need calipers, turning chisels, files, sandpaper, all kinds of things to go with it to get these things accomplished. Last, if not least, it helps to have access to a supply or source of wood clock cases, or wood clock woods, such as mahogany, rosewood, oak, and walnut, frequently used on European clocks. And I've got a board up on the front here showing a variety of veneers with clear shellac on them, in case you want to see the difference. Secondary woods on many American clock cases are going to be poplar or white pine. And wood movements, the arbors are typically going to be a hardwood such as apple wood or maple. And the wheels are going to be mahogany.
George,
Or I'm sorry, cherry.
you want me to change the slide?
Yes. So, and the wood movement plates were oak and wheels are cherry. Many American clock cases were in mahogany and rosewood. Fortunately for us here in Atlanta, we have one of the best sources of veneers and woods. Do we have that?
Number slide.
One.
Just go over your find
Did we have a picture of Carlton's card?
it. Client.
The end.
Oh, it's at the end. Okay. Well, anyway,
So back to the beginning.
go back to the. So there's a store in Atlanta on Hemphill Avenue at 14th. 14th just butts right up to it. Carlton's Rare Woods and Veneers. And they have a store in the front on the street, and in the back they have a really sizable building filled with all kinds of veneers. It's incredible. And many of the veneers are in sheets like this long. It's a great source. We have at the end a card showing their phone number and so forth. So the first series of photographs I wanted to talk about was the problem that people see mostly with wood movement clocks, and that is broken teeth. You can see here, there's a wheel missing a tooth. Here's missing a couple of teeth, missing teeth here. This is going to be a source existing wheels for some of the teeth, trying to match up teeth from spare parts and wheels that we could use that have the same teeth. So most of the problem we see with these wood movement clocks is broken teeth, and on arbors, broken leaves, pinion leaves. So the options are to make new teeth or to take and cannibalize another wheel or spare part. And I've got a box on the floor over here of all kinds of spare wheels and so forth that I got from Ward Francelon years ago, the late Ward Francelon. So if somebody's going to work on a wood movement clock, if you're only going to do one, it's probably not worth trying to gather all the materials. It might be easier to get somebody that makes these wheels. For example, Don Bruno is in Torrington, Connecticut, and he makes new wheels and new parts. And if you're not going to do more than maybe one movement or a couple of wheels, and you don't have a lot of the source material, it might be just as easy to go ahead and pay him to replace a wheel. So you just send in what's broken or whatever and have him make a new one. So like I say, I have a box on the floor there of a whole bunch of different wheels. Sometimes if somebody's going to do something, some of my stuff might be a source. So occasionally I had to make new teeth when I couldn't find a broken wheel that matches the same teeth. So for starters, I'll take the existing wheel, place it on a piece of paper, scroll over and around the same number of good teeth. That gives me a pattern which I can then mark or scribe off on a piece of cherry, with allowing for a base to glue in. Let's say we can go to the next. So there's a great wheel with 3 teeth that I took from an existing broken wheel. Next slide. And those are 3 of the teeth. I'm sorry, 3 of the wheels we just saw previously with the teeth I was able to get from other wheels. And I've got them cut so that they'll be inserted and glued in place. So you want to try and match, like I say, the same teeth. And you got to cut down far enough so that you get a good base to glue them in, otherwise they're not going to hold. And the other thing is that a lot of these teeth that break on these wheels, there are at perpendicular to the grain on the wood, so they're kind of weak, those teeth, and they're the typically ones that are going to break. So if the grain is running this way, the teeth are going to break more often. So you got to cut down deep enough to have enough, to give it enough strength when you replace those teeth. Okay, the next. So I use lightweight clamps when I'm gluing the teeth, replacement teeth in there. And plastic clamps work pretty well, small clamps. And next. So the next couple of photographs are going to be related to the broken leaves on this arbor. We got damaged pinions on that one. And here it's going to be a blank piece of wood that I'm going to use on my wood lathe to make a new arbor. Okay, next photo. Okay, so here's sort of part of the way in. I took that blank piece of wood and starting to cut the new arbor. Next one. Okay, I took it out of the lathe. And that's the new one's taking shape compared to the one that has broken leaves and a broken pinion. Next one. Okay, here's the new replica arbor, and the leaves on the pinion I had to cut out by hand, so I marked on the edge of the bottom of the pinion. I made my pencil marks, and then had to hand file and hand cut the leaves to replace this arbor. Next one. On another broken arbor, bad arbor, I cannibalized. Here's one with broken leaves and a broken pinion. And I cannibalized another one, and I have example parts in this box. And I drilled into here and I drilled in here, put a pin in here, and join them together. Next. Here's the 3 wheels that we started with, and these mark where that's a replacement tooth, 2 replacement teeth, 3 replacement teeth, and then to replace the arbor. All ready to go. Next slide. Okay, the next project is making replacement feet for a triple-decker clock. Another, again, square piece. I usually take what's the tool, and before I start running on my lathe, I'll take the corners off, so I'm not, when you come around on the lathe and try to chisel, it's quite a shock. So, but I marked off in pencil where these feet are gonna end and begin. Next. Okay, so here we are, partway into the project. It's gonna be 4 feet. It's gonna be 2 back feet and 2 front teeth. Not teeth, I'm sorry. Feet, not teeth. Okay, next one. All right, so here we got shape now, pretty well along in the process. Next slide. And there's the 4 feet stained and ready to go. Next slide. It's replacing making new finials. A new finial. You got to measure off everything. Make sure you have enough space in between the work with the tools. Next slide. Here's replacing a column. I think that was your plot, Dan, wasn't it? Your case.
Yes, it was.
Had a pillar and scroll, and he was missing one of the columns. So again, working with a blank piece of mahogany, and we're going to make a replica of this particular column. Next. All right, so I got a 36-inch bed lathe, and we're starting to work on that square piece. Next slide. And here we are matching up the replica with the original, pretty far along at this point in time. Next slide. Here's the comparison, looking on the length of the columns, the original and the replacement. You got to measure, because if you go too far, if you cut it down, you have to start all over again. So it's a constant measuring with the calipers, so forth. Length and all your dimensions. Okay. All right, here the column is pretty well finished. And, okay. All right, now here, it's easier to stain it while it's in the lathe. And of course, I've got it longer than it needs to be because just take it out of the lathe and cut it off. But we're matching the stain in this case to the original down here. Okay. All right. This is another project. There's our friend, the late Glenn Alexander. And one Tuesday evening, he brought this case to me, and it was missing a whole lot of stuff. But it's a Virgin Ives, and this particular Virgin Ives, when they were John Birch and Joseph Ives were together for 1 year, I think it was 1823. And so it's a fairly rare label, Virgin Ives. And I only found one picture of in one of my books showing what this clock should look like. So, and you can see there's no bottom door. There was no movement. It is the original mirror. And these columns at the top, right away you can see that these columns don't match up with the gilded columns down below. There was no movement, there's no top to the case. So it's like, look, do you look a gift horse in the mouth or what? But it was another challenge, so I took it on. So go to the next one. Here's a picture from the contribution of Joseph Ives' Connecticut clock technology. This is what the clock should look like when it's finished. Had paw feet, and of course a Virgin Ives, I'm sorry, a Joseph Ives movement with a carved splat, gilded splat. Of course, the clock that Glenn gave me was missing the chimneys, missing the splat, bottom door, movement, not a lot there. Next slide. First thing I did was take the whole movement apart, and this is all the pieces of the case. I always find it easier when you gotta do a major restoration to go ahead and dismantle the whole thing. Next. Okay, so here's the columns that were at the top that were not original. Fortunately, I was able to see the shadow marks, the shading on the front of the case, so I could take some tracing paper, and I ended up making a pattern out of paper of what the columns should look like. Fortunately for the age of the stain, it was visible what the outline of the new columns were like. Next slide. So I was trying to think for weeks. I kept mulling over in my mind how I'm going to make two half columns. Can't take a dowel and just slice it down the middle. And finally, I think it was during the night, it came to me that I should take two pieces of white pine and 1 by 2, full 1 inch by 2 inches. 1 by 1, I guess it is, 1 by 1. And I glued them together, but I only glued them I made them longer than they had to be. So I glued the two pieces together at the end and over here. Okay, next slide. So again, on my lathe, started working, and you can see the extra length here and here that are glued together. You can see the pile of sawdust and some of the turning tools along with the pattern, and just trying to make these columns. Okay. All right, here we're further along. More sawdust, all the tools. That's the pattern that I'm working against. It's a measure, 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 measure process to get it down to the right foot of measurements. Next slide. Here we are pretty far along, and got to start working with sandpaper and smaller files to get it smooth, to get your final product. Okay. All right, here I now separated the two pieces because I cut off the sides, the ends that were glued, and there is a comparison to the paper pattern, duplicating them. Next. I sent these off to Dave Lima up in Ohio, and he gilded them, and the centers are tortoise shell, replicating what they should look like. Next. And then I had to get a new movement. This is an Ives Swiss cheese movement because it's got the holes, the round holes. Ives made a variety of these strap press movements, and some had different teeth, fine teeth. Some had bulkier teeth, and he kept revising he was a tinkerer, like I said, Bernie Teacup was, or Bernie, always looking for different ways to make things. And Ives was that way. Okay. Now here's the case. Oh, a new door, bottom door I made, new splat, new side rails, new caps, new chimneys. I had to order the paw feet. I don't know how to make those. I don't have the capability or the tools to make those. But everything's now restored and stained and ready to go back together. And there's the finished product. I had Lee Davis make the gilded splat. There's the new columns, the original mirror back in, and Lee Davis did the reverse painting for me. And Lee happened to have, he was doing a glass for somebody else for a same Burge and Ives clock. So this is a replica of what one should look like. Kathy, Dial House 2, restored the dial for me. So it's not only a lot of work, but it's a lot of expense.
Yeah.
So I've got probably $600 into restoring it, but it's a beauty and a rare clock. So anyway, so I took it on as a challenge, and that's what it ended up to be. All right. Here was another separate little project. Was missing a chimney, a rosette that was missing for another clock, and my wood lathe doesn't have a chuck, so I couldn't make it on my wood lathe, so I rigged up a thing on my Chinese metal lathe, and so I could put my wood tool, my wood files, marked all of the circles in pencil, and head on the lathe, I was able to use my wood turning tools to make the rosette. Next slide. So here's the side view. I put a dowel in with a Forstner bit and put it in my metal lathe. And then that's the side view of the rosette chimney. Then I had to make new cap, which are pretty tricky to make because they're only like 2 inches long, and yet they're routed. The edges are routed on 3 sides. And when you put it in your router table, it's hard to keep it without moving. And then you got to end up so that the base, this side, this is the base, it's got to fit on top of this here so it matches the same size. I had to make a new return. And these are typically veneered with mahogany. So anyway, that's the 3 pieces that go on the top of a clock. So the chimney, the cap, and the return. And of course, this dowel comes out. I use the Forstner bit to drill it into the back of the chimney. And that's what you'll see on the back of these rosette chimneys. You're going to see a hole in the back of them because they were done the same with a temporary dowel. Next. And there's the front view of the rosette with a cap, with a return, and the base that fits under the chimney. All stained and ready to be shellacked. And of course, I didn't make 2 of them. One of them must, I guess I copied what was one of them that I had. Next slide. This is another little project. As somebody needed a finial. I can't remember who it was, but I'm making a new finial for a clock for our Vienna regulator. And that might be the only one I have. So it's, like I say, you've got to have enough. Got to measure out everything to make sure you have enough room for the dowel that's going to be inserted into the case. And you got to have enough room to work. So all got to be measured out ahead of time. And I usually use pencil marks on my stock, so I know where to cut. Measuring. So it's, anyway, next slide. So there's and I stained the replica that matched the original. It looks pretty close. Can you tell which is which?
So what's the answer? What's the answer?
The bottom one is the replacement. So, but anyway, you know, I went to high school. I never had a shop, never learned how to do woodworking. So all of the stuff I've been doing I claim to be self-taught, I guess. So, and I don't claim to be an expert in it, but I've learned over the years by trial and error to do all this stuff. Anyway, next slide.
Good results.
Absolutely.
Then this is a project, Bernie's shop. You know, Bernie, like I say, was like Joseph Ives, constantly tinkering, and every time he went to Bernie's shop, he had new ideas about something that he wanted to do differently than what maybe the week before. He was always coming up with new stuff. So he had a number of classes, so-called classes at his shop over the years. And this was one of the, I think, Chris, the last
was
one, making these lighthouse clocks. Next slide. And we can't really call the lighthouse clocks were made by Simon Willard with patent alarm timepieces. And it's hard to call them replicas because Simon Willard every lighthouse clock he made was different. It seems like anyway, no two alike. So ours are kind of a generalized replica of what he did. So I think Charles Brooke came up with the idea of using porch columns from Home Depot to be the center part of our cases for these lighthouse clocks. And we were removing the white outer layers on Bernie's lathe at his shop. Next slide. And there's Chris and I. On this one, we're putting new veneer over the stripped down column parts. They were measured and cut to the right length. And what we did was put glue on the column. I don't know if we did it on the veneer as well, but anyway, we let it get to a point where it was tacky. And then we took on the lathe, this big lathe, and we used the iron and rotated the case part and ironed the veneer on.
Did you use heat with the iron?
Huh?
Did you
Oh,
heat
yeah.
the iron?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, not hot, but definitely warm.
okay.
Next slide. In my shop, one of my duties was, and we worked as a team, then we show up at Bernie's shop, some of us, a couple of us. It was what, Bill Knack, Chris Martin, myself, Byron Teacup, Bernie,
Charlie.
and Charlie Rook. So we showed up at various times over a good year, I guess it was. We would all contribute to making parts or doing stuff. So at my house on my router, I was making the base molding. I made, I don't know how many feet of that, but anyway, next slide. So here's, you're looking from the bottom up, is the molding around the outside, the base of the clock case. And this is the inner parts that were glued together because the base is octagonal. So you get all these clamps holding the molding on. Next slide. In my shop, I have, there's the base, there's the molding attached. There's the center column part that we made from porch columns. And these are a couple of the ring parts that we're going to go to the case. Next slide. All right, here's all those components now glued together, except this part was just sitting on the case. But you can see the various colors to the veneer that are going to have to be matched up. Some a little darker than others, particularly the turned. These bigger pieces were turned on Bernie's lathe. Next slide. All right, so here's the components all put together, but stained, and the feet now on the bottom. Brass ball feet. Next slide. All right, this is my example. Again, we made about how many, 8 or 10 cases all together. And you can see the feet, the molding that was made earlier, and all the pieces now stained. And I got one of these little emblems, brass emblems from online from a jewelry store somewhere. And they were only a couple bucks each, but it has a rope and an anchor, sort of to go with a lighthouse theme. Can't call our clocks as replicas because Simon Willard, every lighthouse clock he made, it seemed like they were different. So there's no one pattern, not like he's made a number of lighthouse clocks the same. They were all, when you look at the books about his lighthouse, patent alarm lighthouse clocks, they're all different. Some have rectangular bases, some have octagon, all different. Next slide. I had a dial made by Pro Clocks. I found the lettering online that I could write my name on, and I put St. Simon's. We used to have a condo at St. Simon's, so I thought, well, that goes with the lighthouse clock. So, but anyway, Pro Clocks sent and made porcelain dial in China. They did a great job. They really, and so I had sent them my signature and sent them this and the dial, and they had made it porcelain and really nice. Really came out nice.
Gold clock, spot clock.
Yes,
Bob Crowder, right?
and he's already registered.
No.
He's gonna be the regional.
Okay. Next. There's the finished lighthouse clock. It has won first place in category of a chapter competition at the 2015 National Convention in Chattanooga. And Pete Schreiner in Florida, had to be very appreciative of him. He did some pinion work on my movement, and he put a passing strike. You can see the hammer up there by the bell. He put the bell stand on as well. And so every hour it just dings for once.
George, is that bell one of the ones that was done in the first project?
No, it's just a oval bell. You can't find the original shaped bells for these things.
This is the second time we've done this at Bernie's shop, and the first go around, which one of the clocks was donated to the National Museum, they actually duplicated one of the bells that was on an original and had somebody do the foundry work and pour it and all that. And I think that was, so I don't think any of those were left from that first project.
No. Sam Ledbetter was involved in that group.
Yeah.
And they had trouble with the movements and that first go around that Bernie group made the first round of lighthouse clocks. Okay, and this is going to be on exhibit at the Mid-South coming up in.
So if you want to see the real thing, you have to come up and look at it. We'll have either 2 or maybe 3 of those clocks from that class will be in the exhibit.
Next slide. I just wanted to mention in doing the work that I've done. Some years ago, early on, I used to use the paint stripper. Was that, what is it, benzene? So originally, years ago, for stripping down these cases, I used to use the methylene chloride strippers, most of which were banned some years back because of if you were in the same room with those things, the vapors were terrible. I used to use them outside when the weather was good. I didn't want to breathe that stuff while I was in the same building. So a friend of ours put me onto Franmar's soy gel, which was supposed to be a much safer stripper. But there were some warnings. There was no vapor from it. It was very easy to use. It stayed wet on the surface. It was really a good stripper, and they're still making it. It's under Blue Bear right now. But there were some warnings particularly from California. I think everything's banned in California, but
Yes.
Anyway, for birth defects and reproductive issues. So while I was doing another article for the Cog Counters Journal, they talked about Franmar and the soy gel. has no methylene chloride, but it does have NMP, methyl 2-pyridylene, which apparently came close to having soy gel being banned in 2018, but it's still available. But these two products are now highly recommended, and that's being much safer. I really haven't used them because I haven't done any recent projects, but these are the two that are most highly recommended now as being safe. Citrus strip and 3M safest stripper. Next. One of the principles I try to employ is to use products that were used when a lot of these clocks were manufactured, and most of them, up until probably recent years, used hide glue, and was the glue of choice. And for a lot of clocks cases, 200 years later, it's still holding on. And there are some, of course, clock cases where some of the veneer will peel off. But overall, hide glue is held up pretty well. It doesn't like moisture so much. But the nice thing about it, when you're using it to restore a clock case, it is reversible. So somebody later on can take it apart, and if they want to do something different, it can be disassembled. I remember when I was using the regular Elmer's wood glue when I was making a cup clock, grandfather clock cases. I glued two pieces of wood together, and shortly thereafter realized I made a mistake. And then hours later, I tried to get it apart, and I had to soak them in a deep sink for hours and hours and hours trying to get those two pieces apart. So compared to hide glue, it would be easily taken apart. So I like to use hide glue, particularly when you're doing restoration of antique clock cases.
How do you get them apart?
Uh,
How do you get them apart with the hide glue?
Well, heat or water, moisture. Try taking the Elmer's glue apart. It's a whole other ballgame. So anyway, a lot of times it has an expiration date on the bottle. I haven't really had a problem using it years later.
Where do you find that?
Most hardware stores carry it. Certainly, the one down in what's the Highlands?
Virginia Highlands. Virginia Highlands.
Virginia Highlands, the hardware store, they always carry it, but most of your hardware stores will carry it. Good stuff, easy to use, doesn't set up immediately, so if you make a mistake, get it apart. So there's just a couple of things that I found useful in doing the stuff I'm doing. First of all, when I cut veneer, I use a lot of painter's tape because I can use tape over my cut. When I'm cutting veneer, I use a box knife. Some people use a veneer saw, but I've just found these knives work just as good. And I'll usually put some painter's tape over where I'm going to cut the veneer so it doesn't splinter as much. And I use artist paint for matching up with my clock case stain. So I use these as a stain. It's artist paint, oil-based, burnt umber and burnt sienna are the ones I use the most to match up with early American cases. And I mix a little, I take a t-shirt, some t-shirt material, put a little bit of mineral oil, mineral spirits, and then dab on this burnt umber and rub it onto the case. That's what I use for the lighthouse cases, and you can match up very well with any of the old clock case stains. And instead of trying to use these can stains. So you just put on layers and layers of it as you need, and you put more mineral spirits on to lighten it up or whatever. So it works really well. So you're going to use them as a stain, not as a paint. And for gluing, if I have a real small piece of veneer I'm replacing on a clock case, I just tear off a match from a book of matches and use the broken end down here as a little brush to put the glue on the little piece of veneer. And if I've got a larger piece of veneer, I use a acid brush. And then if I really have a lot of bigger piece of veneer to put on a case, this is kind of crumpled up now, but it's a little paint roller. And I use that to take a paper plate and put a bunch of hide glue on it, and then roll it onto the case, and then attach my veneer. So these are just a couple of ideas for using various tools. And then, of course, I use the can of ready-made shellac. Shellac was the choice, was the material used to finish early American clock cases for many years. I guess now they use more veneers, more varnishes, but shellac is the historically used product. So I used, and out of the can, never had a problem with shellac, even a couple of years, and for years, never had a problem with it not working well. Like on that lighthouse clock, I probably put most of my work, I put about 4 coats of shellac. And then when I'm all finished, I go back and rub it all down with 4-0 steel wool, a little bit of olive oil, and it really smooths it out. It gives you a beautiful finish. So I didn't put the olive oil on there, and I didn't put the shellac can, but right out of the can. Some people use the shellac flakes to make their own shellac, but I've never had a problem with canned shellac, even years later. So it used to be a little bit trickier with age, but I've not had a problem. Let's see. So I have pictures on a card on the table of a Seth Thomas Pilgrim Scroll that I obtained from Raspberry, I think it was, some years ago. And this clock was, there's a whole bunch of pictures up here on this placard, but he had this clock for sale, and it was in terrible condition. They put a wood brass movement in it and took out the wood movement. They drilled extra holes in the dial. They took, when I found it, it was, somebody had put like 3 or 4 inch finishing nails down, straight down to the arches. And the bottom, the base was all torn up. And you can see it in the pictures here on the table. And our friend Rick Mangum did a replica glass for me. I found a 30-hour Turry movement online. That was a Seth Thomas. This has a Seth Thomas label. But I had to take this clock and do a lot of restoration. And it came out really nice. And Kathy did a beautiful job on the dial, restoring the dial. Next. And that's the place, if you want to go see rare woods and veneers, pay a visit to Carlton McClendon, Hemphill Avenue, right by Northside Drive, Hemphill and 14th. Like I say, in the front building, they have all kinds of rare woods, pieces, all different sizes for woodworkers. And in the back, they have a warehouse. It's filled with veneers. It's unbelievable, the source we have. Good place. And that's, I have that. This is here on the front table, but that's some of the pictures of, like I had to take the base, I took it completely apart. That's some example of the botched works. It's a mess. And I want to thank Mary Jones for, I don't know how many times we got together doing all this, putting this all together. And thank you, Mary. Mary did the PowerPoint and stuff. So anyway, any questions? Yeah.
What glue do you use when you replace, what glue do you use when you replace the teeth on a wooden movement?
I use high glue.
Oh, you use high glue on this?
Yeah.
And when you made the lighthouse clock, did you use high glue on that?
Putting the pieces together, the case pieces. Yes.
That's high glue also.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's my favorite.
How do you use an iron veneer? Do you just apply the iron directly to the veneer? Or do you put
Yeah,
it all?
right on the veneer itself.
You don't
Very,
worry about
very,
burning it or?
No, it's not going to be that.
it's a very low heat, just enough to warm up the wood and the glue.
Yeah, there's glue underneath it.
It's amazing how Chris and I were doing that, rolling that veneer on. I mean, that's how many years ago now? 6 or 7 years ago, remember? And then veneer is held beautifully. Yeah.
Some veneer has that marquetry in it, the carved pieces in the veneer. Do you still use, and you still use an iron veneer that has like carved pieces in it, like marquetry? Or like a table? Or,
Not sure.
I guess you could, I guess. Yeah, like some cases, some veneer has like it'll be veneer and then it'll have carved pieces in the veneer and decorative into the veneer. And that's just a piece of veneer. So you press down on the heat to it, you have multiple pieces of veneer. Maybe not that like
Well, I mean, well, first, for flat surfaces, I don't usually use an iron. I just clamp the veneer on. But you can't clamp the round pillar. So flat surfaces, you could use another piece of wood, piece of plywood, whatever. You get your veneer on, you can clamp it. I was just talking about on a column like that, round surface. Right. Normally, I wouldn't use an iron.
Would you get bubbles underneath it? Otherwise? They don't, like, don't spend more to do this.
Yeah. Came out.
Yeah.
Any other? Yes.
Just one final comment. If you let everyone know that your work day is tomorrow.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope to make it to 87. It's a pleasure to be here with you all, by the way. Love you all, and just can't thank our organization, our chapter, for how many friends we've made over the years. Next year will be mine. I've been a member of NAWCC for 50 years, so it's and I love the bulletins they put out. I love the material. I think it's a great organization. And it's not just about collecting clocks. I would say it's about collecting friends. You know. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Want to take a look at the Todd Counter's journal? I've got a box, cigar box full of pieces of veneer. And then down on the floor, there's a box with all kinds of Turry type clock parts for the movements. Anyway, just look around. If anybody needs veneer, I think I've got it. And, but give it a try. I mean, I never had anything like shop in high school or anything like that. This is all the stuff I've learned on my own, just practicing and learning. And I started out making birdhouses and stuff like that. And so it's been a journey. And I appreciate you all. One other little thing, when you're working on a lathe, particularly wood lathe, it's critical that you get the dowel or the piece you're working with centered on the lathe. And this little tool, plastic tool, is a great thing. And it has a way to, on one side, you can put it on top the top edge of a dowel, and on the other side, you have a square piece, and you can draw your lines so you can cross them, and then you find your center that way. And I usually take a nail and hammer the nail partway into the end of the piece I'm going to put in the lathe so that I have a center. And then I do the same thing on the other end of the piece. So you got to cross where you're using this tool. You end up with a scribe cross and put a point with a nail and at the X and then put it in the lathe. So you got the wood plank centered. So this little thing I probably paid a couple of bucks for really comes in handy. But you got to have a way to make sure you find center to start. Otherwise, your work's going to be off. Always.